Well, we are here today with David A. Wimsett, who is, at the moment, I believe, writing a fantasy novel.
In fact, I've written a fantasy novel, and I'm just going through and writing the second book right now. I finished the first draft, and I'm almost at the end of the second draft, and I intend to have it ready by late spring, early summer.
How exciting. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about your novels.
Sure. Well, I've been writing for a long time. I've done a lot of professional writing, a lot of technical writing. I've had articles in magazines and newspapers, and online articles as well. I first published my debut novel in 2017. This was a book that I titled Beyond the Shallow Bank. And it's a story about a woman named Margaret who has suffered a life-changing crisis after having fought her way into the male-dominated world of publishing to become a magazine illustrator. She comes with her husband to a small fishing village to try and work her life out. And while she's there, she meets many people. And one of them is an older woman who becomes a mentor. One accuses Margaret of being a witch and burning the hotel down with magic. But a man carries a cremation urn around with him everywhere he goes, containing his wife's ashes, and he speaks to it as if she were still alive. And of course, everyone in the village speaks to it as well. They're in the village.
Right.
But then there's a young woman who skips and sings nonsense songs and seems to have no concept of daily life. And Margaret's afraid she might have suffered a childhood trauma, but some of the village say she's a Selkie, one of the magical creatures from Celtic mythology who lives in the land as a human and the sea as a seal. And
I see.
Through their influence and Margaret's own self-determination, she strives to discover who she is and what she truly wants. She's a tough woman. She's forbidden to paint. She wants to paint and not illustrate the magazine articles, but she's told you have to illustrate the articles, so she paints in secret and doesn't tell anybody about it.
Yeah, that'll do it.
That's my debut novel. That came out almost 2 years ago. And then my other novel just came out last May. Now, this is a fantasy story with a slight twist. It takes place in a gender-balanced world. Women have the same freedoms, the same rights, and the same authority.
Interesting.
And in fact, the core of the story is that a man and woman must work together as equals to prevent sorcerers from waking an evil dragon who would terrorize the world, while at the same time, rival baronies are plotting civil war. And for this story, I created very full characters. They have a lot of conflicts within themselves. So some of them have to overcome their own weaknesses and find their strengths as much as to battle outside creatures. And it's got magic, action, adventure, political intrigue, all that good stuff. But it's also filled with poetry, background stories, the legends of the lands, languages. There's even music. I composed music for the book, and I put some of the lyrics in the story, and then I created entire musical scores, and I put them in the appendix of the books.
Okay, wow.
So those are my two books, and the next book I'm working on now is volume 2 of that series, and it picks up at the end of the one story, and it moves the story forward.
So I'm sensing a slight theme between your two novels that are out at the moment with sort of gender equality.
In fact, I also have a little novelette that I published. It's exclusively through Amazon. It's a Kindle book and it's a paperback, and it also contains very strong female characters. Those are prominent in my books, and I do have a continuing theme that has to do with gender balance, with equality. And in the first book, Margaret is trying to strive against a very gender unbalanced world that takes place in the year 1901, and I said it there because it was a blatant prejudice at that time. Everyone just accepted it, and quite frankly, today much of those prejudices still exist, but they're covert.
Right.
And so it creates a contrast, and Margaret is exemplifying this is what's really happening to women today, and not necessarily just to what women endured when they were in 1901. And the second book takes a little step forward to create a world that is gender balanced, in which the very language itself is carefully chosen to be able to present a gender balanced prose. So instead of saying the men charged down the hill, the soldiers charged down the hill. The fishermen went out in the lake, the fishers went out in the lake. So I specifically looked for ways to be able to bring out a way to be able to have, in a general sense, removal of the question of gender. But then, of course, when you get specific to people, then you talk about the gender, the
Right.
specific person. And it's more that particular person's character as opposed to this is a representation of men or representation of women. And so that's the main thrust of all of my books, having very strong female characters and being able to bring forward the notion that it really doesn't matter if you're male or female, you actually can participate fully in the society.
Now, I'm a linguist, so I'm awfully interested in your language piece. How was that, reworking language?
Well, I actually created a language for the second book, and there's in the appendices there is a history of the language, which tells where the words came from and how they actually at one time had a relationship within gender, and how over time some of that changed so that it became a gender neutral area. I recently wrote an article that I posted in LinkedIn and on Facebook that was about writing gender balanced prose. For instance, I've done a lot of technical writing. I work in the IT field, and I have been writing a tremendous number of technical manuals and other business documents. So a lot of times you would see in the 70s and the 80s, when the operator sees the red button, he presses the blue, or sees the red light flashing, he presses the blue button.
Sure.
So that later became when he or she or he. The problem with that is it still brings out the notion there's gender imbalance. And the question comes to mind, who goes first, the she or the he? So instead of that, you could simply say, when operators see the red light flashing, they press the blue button. Completely sidesteps the whole notion of gender. And in doing so, the words we use affect the cultures that we live in. Now, it takes time for this to happen. But as more and more gender prose can appear, the notion that there is a difference between what women and men can do, and there are restrictions on what they can and can't do, can begin to move away, and people will be able to just accept people as the person that they are. Because we're all, of course, individuals. We all have our strengths, our weaknesses. We all have the ability to do noble things, and sometimes we do base things. That's just human nature. But to remove the notion that people of a specific gender or culture or ethnicity or religion or any other way to be able to divide people up is somehow going to say one is better than the other can be slowly removed. But it takes a lot of time. African Americans have suffered phenomenal prejudice. And at one time in the 1950s, extremely derogatory things were said that would indicate they had less intelligence, less capability. Now, over time, this has moved forward, but you still see in our cultures tremendous prejudice that still exists, that is still rooted. And this takes time to be able to work out. And hopefully, by presenting the gender balance, by presenting the notion that you don't have to consider this as a way to break people up and decide which is better, which is worse, because we have a kind of strange tendency of human beings. When we hear the word different, we immediately begin to say, which is better? Apples, oranges, which is better? Well, there's no way to be able to say one is better than the other. People may prefer one over the other, but they're not different. They're both fruits. And they have a lot more in common than they have that makes differences between them. And the same thing applies with people. We're much more like each other than we are different from each other. So one of my goals in writing these books is to be able to present that from the standpoint of feminism, which of course is not a war between men and women. It's simply a movement to create equality.
Right. How interesting. So how is, building an entire world, though, is probably a little bit different than just changing the way you write.
Absolutely. So when I'm building this world, I have to be able to think, well, what's the background of it? Where did it come from? Where are the cultures? How did they interact with each other? How did they affect the way that people thought? How were the languages affecting the way that people thought? What are the customs that these people have? So all of it is made up. It's all completely created within my own mind. The process is a very interesting one for me. I don't write from an outline. I start with a general concept of where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes have an idea of where it's going to lead to, but not more than a vague idea. And then I just start creating. And
Yep.
as I write, things suggest themselves to me.
Yes.
Concepts come out, plots, characters, situations. It simply means, it looks in my mind as if that's the next thing that should be happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I take and write down. Now, of course, in the first draft, there's things that come in and they get removed because they are dead ends. They go no place.
Right.
Sometimes the exercise of doing the second draft right now is that now I flesh out things that had just been a concept or idea and be able to build on them and put in emotions, put in relationships. I really do enjoy writing books that have relationships in them and strong
Mm-hmm.
relationships between people. I don't forget that a story has to have a good plot and you have to have a little bit of action moving things forward.
Sure.
But at the same time, you can create characters who propel the story by the way that they interact with the plot and the way they interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So creating a whole world is quite a challenge, I have to admit. The music I find very interesting. I've composed a number of songs.
Sure.
I've never had anybody record them. I'm happy to do that for anyone who wants to be able to become, make it into a mega hit. But I enjoy doing compositions. I've studied composition in school.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just love the idea of, okay, now I'm at a point in the book where I want to be able to express something that is related to the story, but at the same time shows that these people live in a real world to their
Mm-hmm.
minds. And so there are a number of songs. There's a song, for instance, where one of the characters is thought to have died, and someone else sings a lament for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just created this song. It's a lament of that person's death. And there are other songs that are foreshadowing for things to come. There's a song that I created that's actually a 15-stanza epic poem in a Homeric style.
Oh,
Now,
my.
only the first couple of lines appear in the text,
Sure.
and then an explanation is given of what it is. And the purpose is to set a certain level of tension between two characters that is going to be played out through the entire book.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's used in a foreshadowing sense. In another song, I created a nursery rhyme that is sung by a young girl, and she's just singing this song in the background and talking about these creatures that are in the song, these magical creatures. Well, that song actually works out to be a clue to unlock a puzzle to be able to allow someone to escape from a trap. It's really a rhyme that was to memorize. This is the way you get out of this particular situation. And so by creating these things and integrating them inside of the story, I was able to enhance the notion that, well, you know what, these people really did make these songs up for a reason, and they really had something to do with the way they lived and how they interacted with each other. So it's a lot of fun. I just love sitting down and writing. Sometimes I may reach a point where I think, gee, this might be a little tough to figure out what to do next. But then it just comes out of me. It's as if, in a Shakespearean way, it droppeth as a gentle rain from heaven. I simply come up with these ideas, and a lot of writers I know have the same experience, where as they write, it just says, this is the next thing to happen. This is the dialogue. Now, one of the things I have a little advantage of is that I'm also a stage actor. I am on stage for a very long time, and so I have the identity of dialogue. I understand the presentation of dialogue, and so when I'm writing dialogue, I actually speak it aloud to myself, and I put intonations into it so I can understand how would this character really speak, and I look to ask, how does each character speak? What is their speech pattern? What is it that they say, and how do they say it? And by doing that, I draw on my theater background and my theater experience to be able to make dialogue that moves and flows and at the same time propels the story forward and keeps the plot running and exposes character. So that rather than having to say something like, he was very angry, I can write a piece in which I put that person in a setting and he says dialogue that reveals anger.
Right.
So this is something that I again enjoy very much.
Sure.
It's really a lot of fun for me. Not a chore. I know a lot of writers talk about writer's block, but for me, it doesn't really happen in the way that people describe it. I will reach a point where I have to sometimes stop and let it brew in my mind. I have to go and take a walk around, or maybe watch some television, but in the background, my mind is still churning on what the plot is and what the characters are going to do next. And then I come back and I start to put it down. And as I'm working, it just tends to flow out of me.
So your writer brain never turns off.
No, actually, it does not. It's running constantly. But it's a very enjoyable experience. It's one of the things that really makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something.
Yeah.
And whether I sell 1 million books or whether I sell 20 books, it's still the process of creation and sharing with people. That's my ultimate goal, to share things with people. And I go and I've done just finished a big book tour, actually, in Atlantic, Canada. And I was able to sit and talk with people and share my story and hear their stories. People will come and tell me intimate tales of their lives, and I will speak with them, and we create a dialogue between each other. And I just love speaking with people. I enjoy hearing their stories, and I enjoy sharing my story with them and telling them, not from a standpoint of, I want to sell you this book, but from a standpoint of, I've written this story, and you might actually like it. This is something you might enjoy. And by doing that, people really respond. I am very successful when I go out and do these tours. And I really am able to connect with folks because I really listen to them. And I enjoy speaking with them. I say hello to everybody. Whoever comes to the door, I say a really sincere hello. Yeah. And some people say hello back, and some people don't. And some people stop to talk to me. Some people don't. Some people buy a book. Some people don't. But it doesn't really matter, because I'm there for 2 to 4 hours, getting to meet people and getting to enjoy being with people and being around folks, and in a very, very social way. It's just a tremendous amount of fun.
Yeah. So how do you put together a book tour? I've never done one, so I'm new at the whole process.
For this one, I simply contacted the Indigo, which is the largest book chain here in Canada. And I contacted the buyer, and I said, would you like to carry my books? Now, the books are distributed through a company called Ingram. Now, Ingram is one of the largest book distributors around, and they have accounts with almost every bookstore. So anybody can purchase books from them and have them delivered to the store. And they did that. And then he gave me the names of the major people in the area, and I just contacted them directly and said, would you like to have me come and do a book signing or reading? And they almost all said yes. And so I then did my little dog and pony show and went out, and I talked to people about the books. I even sang one of the songs from the book. It's a drinking song, and it always brought smiles to everyone's faces. So I simply just made the contact with folks, and as an independent publisher, that's what I have to do. I have to do everything that a traditional publishing house would do. I have to not just write the book, but I have to hire editors. I have to hire people for covers. I have to make sure it's typeset. I have to get the proofing done. I have to do the distribution, or make sure distribution is done, as somebody does that for me. And then I have to do the marketing, and I have to do the advertising, and I have to present myself. And that is something that in today's world, many authors have to do, even if they were to publish through a larger traditional house, because unlike in the 50s and even the 60s, publishing houses really don't have budgets set aside for things like book tours or for putting out odds. And you may get a mention in Publishers Weekly, but it's really up to the authors today to do that. And one of the advantages I have as a stage actor is to be able to present myself and to read my books and to encounter people and engage them. I've been to so many book signings in which the author simply sat at the table and they waited for someone to talk to them. And I remember once at a place called the Kyber Club, which is a venue that a lot of authors use locally. Some woman stood up and she shuffled her feet and looked down at the stage. And the first thing she said was, I really hate doing this. And I thought, Well,
Oh no.
you shouldn't do that because you want people to be excited about what you've written. You want people to share in the excitement and the joy of what you've written. And I'm a member of an organization called the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia, and they produce different seminars. And so I've actually put out a proposal for a seminar to teach people, how do you read your material? How do you present yourself? How do you do it both from the standpoint of getting over stage and getting over worries, but also practical things like, how do you control your breath? How do you project your voice so people can hear you? Things of that nature. I used to belong to a Toastmasters club, and I sometimes gave talks on those particular things. I made them all stand up and breathe correctly from their diaphragm and project out, and was able to assist them in showing them this is how you really get your voice out. This is just a mechanical thing, but it is a very mechanical thing. So that in itself was, again, it's a very good joy. I really enjoyed being with folks who really would get up, overcome their own fright, their own worries, and present it, and to see the growth. I was with the club for a year. To see the growth of some of these folks from the beginning until they reached that year in was just remarkable. The stamina they had, the confidence they had, it was really very satisfying to watch.
So as far as the writing process goes, how long does it take you usually to come up with all of the bits and pieces, including the music, because that is just lovely?
Well, that's a difficult question to ask in a way. The first two books took decades to finish. And the reason they took decades to finish is that, one, I was running my own computer consulting firm, and that took a lot of my time. Two, I raised my son as a single parent, and that took a lot of time. And so I had time in the evenings to write, but I was so concentrating on these other things. It wasn't until I reached a point just a few years ago that I really said, you had better do something about this. And so that's when I really put the effort in. And it took me probably about a year, a little more, to get the first book into shape. And I basically did a full rewrite on that.
Oh, wow.
The second book, it took about 9 months. This particular book, I started it in, August, and I've got through the first draft. I've got the second draft about 3/4 of the way through, and then I anticipate that I'll have the last draft just before I send it to my editor sometime in March. And so that would be about a 7-8 month process. And then my editor and I will go through a 3-pass process where she will go through and do one set of corrections, and I will take that and I will fix those things and send it back to her, and then it go back and forth, and we have little discussions about things that I think should be in the book and she thinks shouldn't be in the book. And my rule is that if she doesn't pass the book, it doesn't get published. It's just like any other commercial house. I don't push the book out unless my editor says this book is ready to go out. And that makes certain that the quality is of its highest caliber. That's one of the things that has shied people away in the early days of what was called self-publishing, in which people would simply write something and put it out on Amazon, and it was full of mistakes, misspellings, the plot made no sense, the characters changed, appearance, because there was no one editing these materials, and so it got a very bad reputation. But as different people have started to become much more professional about this and started putting these things in, for instance, David Mamet is a self-publisher himself. He publishes all of his own works now. And more independent publishers took that step over to become professional and are producing phenomenal works out there. Just really high caliber work that I feel could compete with any of the literary prizes that are being handed out.
Absolutely. Now the trick is actually getting people to notice it.
That's always a trick. I have joined a marketing co-op that helps to be able to cut the cost down to get these books out. I just received a mailing. They sent a mailing out to libraries across the United States, giving information about the different books that their members have, and I got a response back from a large number of them, and so I sent a little letter out to all of them to see if they would want to carry it in their library. And this is the kind of thing you have to keep looking for. Where can you get the word out? You can, of course, talk to your friends and your family and your neighbors, but you also have to be able to put out the word more in a large sense. Social media is kind of a difficult way to do that because it's hard to actually direct sell on social media. You have to produce things that are a service to people and let your name be known and let people find, well, gee, I'd like to find out more about this person. And so I write articles that have to do with the craft of writing, for instance, or social issues, women's issues. I put out statements, and I have my own personal Facebook page, for instance, but I also have my business page in Facebook as well. And so I post things in there. Now I do put in things like, I will be at a reading at such and such a store between this date and this date. And for reasons that I did not disagree with, but didn't quite know what they were going to do, is Amazon actually discounted my fantasy novel 40%. And so I put a notice out on Facebook. I did an advertisement on that saying, this is now 40% off, and to be able to get people to know it's available and it's something that is going to be a little less expensive than normal. Although my experience is that people aren't as concerned about the price of the book as they are about the subject and the quality of the writing of the book.
Yes.
This is something that is much more impressive, and meeting people one-on-one gives me the chance to be able to convey that, and it's somewhat a little more difficult perhaps by doing it in print or doing it online. But the key I found to social media is you've got to do a service. You have to be engaged with it. You have to be engaged with taking care of people and giving something away for free. And that's the whole key to that. So yes, it's a lot of work, and you do have to get the books noticed, and you have to constantly be doing marketing as well. Now, of course, for a lot of writers, that's something they don't want to do. They do not want to deal with the business of writing. They want to deal with writing, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to say. And for them, a more traditional house is something that they would want to look for, or perhaps a university press or another small press, and simply deliver the manuscript and then have them do that. But they still are in the dilemma of, how do you get people to know about the book? Because those presses, particularly the smaller ones, have no budgets for being able to do advertising. And you kind of have to take that on yourself. So it's something that some authors are reluctant to do because they're very introverted. They don't want to have to speak with people. They don't want to have to do that. Yet if you don't, no one knows about your book, and you wind up being Emily Dickinson, and you sell a couple of poems in your lifetime, and the rest are in a desk to be discovered way after you were dead. So this is something that, unfortunately, is the reality of today's publishing world. You have to take the initiative to get your book known, to have yourself, well, for instance, just speaking with you today on your podcast, to be able to make my name known, to make the books known, and that is the way that you have to go through it.
Yes.
Sadly. So
I don't know, you get to build relationships and
absolutely.
Rising tide and all that.
Yeah, for both Beyond the Shallow Bank and for Dragons Unremembered, if people are able to know who I am and see some of the things I'm doing, they may be tempted to say, I'd like to find out more about this author and what he has to say. And so this is the way that you have to use social media. You can't go on and say, buy this thing from me, because people will be very turned off by that. The most powerful thing, of course, is when people like your book and they say, I like this book. You should buy it. Because people trust their friends, of course, more than they would trust somebody telling them they should buy the book. And so it's a process that is never ending. You can't let off on it. I have to set aside time every day for writing and time for marketing. It has to be done that way.
Yeah. Well, it has been absolutely fantastic talking with you. I learned a whole lot. I am curious about one more thing.
Certainly.
So, say you were a stage actor. What sort of shows did you do?
Oh, I did a wide variety. I did straight dramas. I did Shakespearean work. I did comedies. I did improv theater. I did a lot of musicals. I was suitless, and a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, for instance. And I played a dual role of Merlin and King Pellinore in Camelot in one production. I was the governor in Man of La Mancha. And they're all just wonderful. So I got to do stage acting, I got to do singing, and a little dancing too. So it was a tremendous amount of fun. I really enjoyed it. I haven't done a show in a long time though, and the reason really is that it's sometimes a little difficult to have to spread yourself too thin off to too many different arts.
Yeah.
And I have decided that I will sort of pull back on that, and I concentrated really on the writing. That was the thing I really wanted to make sure that I got done and got out, and focus on that. Because focus is very important. If you can't focus it, the most phenomenal idea you have will never become reality.
Right.
Writing is not an easy thing to do. Writing is something that you have to devote yourself to. You have to be able to say, I commit to this thing. And that commitment has got to be constant. And the best thing is to do what you should do, which is write every single day. Because it not only creates discipline, but you also remember what you just wrote, and it creates consistency. I just finished, though, a very interesting master's course with online with Margaret Atwood. She had presented this course, and it was all recorded, where there was no interaction, but she's a phenomenal person. Just so knowledgeable and so open, very giving. It was like I was sitting in her living room having tea. And she said that very same thing. Write every day. Of course, I don't always do that. So you just have to stop beating yourself up and just say, okay, well, I didn't write yesterday, but today I'll write. Right. And then you just move forward with it. But I take a notebook with me wherever I go. A lot of the writing is done by hand. When I'm at a restaurant or I'm waiting for something like a plane or a bus or whatever I'm doing, and I simply pull the notebook out and I continue writing. And I don't necessarily write in chronological order. Sometimes I'll say, there's a set of scenes I really want. For instance, now in this second draft, there is a situation where the kingdom, or the monarchy, I should say, and I use the word monarchy specifically, was experiencing a situation where some people who had great prejudices had been shoved out, but they've come back in, and people who had been in a previous war and been invited from other countries to stay are now being pushed out. And so they are refugees going across the country. And so in writing that, I knew I wanted to have certain things happen. And so I wrote up large sections of that. And it was completely outside of the chronological order of the book. But then I went back and I pulled pieces of that out and inserted them into places where I wanted them to be. And as I did that, then I realized I have to now enhance this and move this forward and add this particular thing. And so that was the process of not necessarily following the story from start to finish. And a lot of writers write in that order. They don't particularly say, well, I'll start with day 1 and go to day 50.
Right.
They break it up and write things that they're ready to write. And sometimes you're just not ready to write a particular scene. There may be a very emotional scene that you say to yourself, I really have to think about that before I write that. And so I maybe will hold off on that for a day or two and then go back to that particular scene and write that. So that's, again, it's a matter of discovery for me. I don't follow a preconceived concept of where we're going. It simply just flows as it flows. And I really enjoy that. And sometimes, to tell you the truth, when I reread I'm doing it, it surprises me because I forgot I put that in there.
I have done that a few times. Alrighty, well, is there anything else you'd like to add, writing related or otherwise?
Well, I think you've given me the opportunity to cover an awful lot of ground. I might just mention the books again, because they always say do that when you're in a review. The first one is called Beyond the Shallow Bank, and it's available to booksellers just about everywhere. You can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in the States, and in bookstores here in Canada. And the other is Dragons Unremembered, and it's volume 1 of the Carandir saga. Carandir is the monarchy that I'm writing about. And so the second book is going to be volume 2, and I've not settled on the title yet. It will depend on... I assign the titles right at the end of the book because I don't always know what the book's really going to express completely. And so I have a working title, but I'm not going to necessarily be tied to that. Yes. But both of those books are now available. They're available in Kobo's, Nooks, Kindles, as well as in paperback. Beyond the Shallow Bank is available in hardback as well.
Okay, great.